And what's interesting, the agency usually comes back and says, "This is amazing. How did you... This sounds like better than our music productions. This is like so authentic. This has grit. This seems like finding the Beatles in the garage." And I said,
that's a good one.
I said, well, that's what every agency guy wants. They want to find the Beatles in the garage, or Coldplay, or U2, or whatever, and be able to say, I was the first one who heard this.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jody Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. Here's the first part of my interview with Uli Reese. My next guest left his hometown of Stuttgart to attend university in Los Angeles and start his career as an orchestra conductor, composer, and orchestrator in Hollywood, working on shows like Paramount's Star Trek: The Next Generation and Disney's DuckTales. A lot has happened since then. He's an author, scholar, and co-owner of sonic branding consultancy AMP. He's a 5-time Cannes Lion speaker and is considered one of the main thought leaders in the audio branding industry. From a Lion to an Emmy, he has won almost every industry award possible for his work. Over the last decade, his book series, 101 Great Minds on Music, Brands, and Behavior, added a significant contribution to the education and understanding of sonic branding on both agency and brand side. Through over 200 conversations with the most influential leaders in marketing, his mission is to change the conversation we're having about sonic branding. His name is Uli Reese, and I have no doubt this conversation will be as fascinating as it is enlightening, so buckle up. As always, if you have questions for my guest, you're welcome to reach out through the links in the show notes. And if you have questions for me, visit audiobrandingpodcast.com, where you'll find a lot of ways to get in touch. Plus, subscribing to the newsletter will let you know when the new podcasts are available. And if you'd consider it, I'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. You can leave a review that I'd love to feature in future podcasts, either in written or in voice format from the podcast's main page. And now, here's my interview with Uli Reese. Well, it's so great to see you, Uli. I really appreciate your taking the time today. Thank you so much.
Of course. Glad to be here.
So how have you been? Yeah, it's been a while since we spoke.
Yeah, that's right.
Have you been doing well?
Was it before or after Cannes?
I think it was before.
Yeah, so there was quite an interesting experience. It was my 13th Cannes, actually. I went there first time.
Oh, really?
like 30 years ago. And and there was a two-year break, and then so everybody kind of reconvened, and what was really interesting was it used to be, I thought about this, how it was, and 30 years ago it was guys getting together, saying, I spent $5 million on this commercial, or I got the Beatles, and then it was kind of an inside. It was kind of an inside club, and then now it's like the creator economy, and I felt like democratization of creativity was happening. It was like if you have content that people want to see, and you're in the Amazon, you scale, you call the shots, and it was pretty amazing, a pretty big difference to when I was there first.
Yeah. So I guess the type of people that are attending has changed over the years too.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. Like Logitech, for example. I saw they have his name is Bradman Rock. He's a major influencer on YouTube, tens of millions of followers, and he's the first C-level hire, which is interesting. And it was not, I want your clicks, or it was no, we want your input, we want your knowledge, and and it was it's really interesting what's happening there now, and it has influence in so many different areas of behavior and of course music too.
I'm going to ask you a very basic question.
Sure.
When you say C-level, what do you mean by that?
C-level is chief marketing officer, chief
like
creative,
CEO, CMO,
or is everything with the C in front. It's
okay,
kind
got
of
it.
No, it's good. Please.
Industry terms, I want to make sure people understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I definitely want to hear more about what's going on with Cannes, because that must have been an amazing experience, even if it's the 13th one. But going back, I want to ask if you. I always start out my interviews with this question because I like the interesting answers that I get, and I was wondering what yours would be. Do you have an early memory of how sound moved you?
Wow, of how sound.
Something you remember from your childhood, maybe. I don't know. What got you interested in sound in the first place? I mean, I know you have a background in film and all of that stuff. So was there something you heard or, experienced in your early life that got you interested in this kind of thing?
Very, very early was, I think, the clicking sound of Lego pieces. I always loved Lego. And I think just I mean, my playing piano and writing and everything that came very early, but that was not just sound, but the very first kind of, I would say, product sound or sound that I really remember, and I was probably 4 or 5 years old, is Lego.
And that got you interested in more? I mean, it's definitely a nice sound. I think a lot of us remember that sound.
Yeah, what might be interesting in this respect is that I had piano lessons from when I was 7 years old. Like like my 3 other siblings. I'm the 4th, and I was just not interested in it. I thought, why, and this isn't, please don't get me wrong, there's no arrogance, but why should I read or play what other people wrote? I didn't get the concept. And I was also extremely lazy. And eventually I understood, kind of how that chord goes to that. So the language, and then I realized I could add notes or whatever, and then I would make fun of my piano teacher and just play C major, well-tempered piano, Johann Sebastian Bach, in with different inversions or adding notes and everything, and it drove her crazy, and
I can imagine.
And she called my dad and said he's unteachable. What
oh, wow.
he never does what I tell him to do, and then one day I had it. I took a red ball pen, and there were just 2 pages of music, and I basically said, okay, this is how I want this to be, and basically destroyed the entire score. Took it to my piano teacher. And put it on the stand, and said, so this is how I think this should be, and I'm 9 years old, and she looked at me, and her jaw dropped to the floor, and she said, Uli, one thing, Bach, Beethoven, Handel, all these guys, they're written in stone. You don't change them. They're iconic. And I said, why wouldn't I change them? Do you know if it was his intention? And she just basically gave up. And so the quick story then to that was that might be interesting is my dad talked to me and he said, why are you doing this? And I said, because I'm really interested in how this goes together. And he took me away from the piano lessons, but I kept playing just by myself. And I remember this 12th of June 1975. I'm 12 years old, and I went to see Jaws, music by Steven Spielberg. And I came home to my dad and I said, this is what I want to do. His name is Steven Spielberg. I have no clue what he's doing, but this is exactly what I want to do. And this is...
There you go.
Basically, this is the whole story. And then he said, okay, then I'll get you a score and then try to read music and you need to learn to conduct. And this is eventually what I did. So it was... It was, in a way, pretty simple, but because it was a kind of a tunnel vision, but...
It's never quite simple, is it? Never quite, no. But I could definitely see the beginnings of that composer in you that was just offended by not being able to change things. I like that a lot.
You're right. I was offended. I just didn't get it. I thought the language, I want to learn the letters and the syntax and how things go together, and it's interesting, tonal based music, like Beethoven or Bach or whatever, is pretty simple in terms of if you go through it in from the second to the fifth to the one, it's like how you break down big scores. Beethoven's Fifth, you can play at the piano. Very simple, and it sounds bombastic, of course, once it's orchestrated. But the language is something. Simplicity. It's like Apple.
Yes, yeah, and I think that it takes a very almost musically three-dimensional mind to understand where all of that fits in, which I think is what composers do. I mean, they think about it in a broader sense because you're composing for a whole orchestra, right? You're not just composing for...
It was interesting because I first went to... I knew I wanted to write for film, so I did my school, finished that, and I knew I wanted to go to the US because this was where things were made, and I went to 2 or 3 universities in New York, and it was all like, oh yeah, we'll analyze measure 83 of Beethoven's Third, and then we'll understand the analysis. And I was like, no.
That's what you didn't want to do when you were 9.
No. I mean, we're not going to do that. I said, I want to write music for film and television. And then one of the professors, I think from NYU, told me, well, there's a school, Uli, in Los Angeles called Grove School, and they have 40 orchestra sessions a year, and they do nothing but getting people ready to work in the film industry. There are even people that have a PhD in music, but they're not ready to work in the industry because it's like, okay, can you write 3.5 minutes of Dixieland music till tomorrow for these people, and can we record that, and is that going to work? And I said, that's exactly what I want to do. And so you went. I went and did that. It was interesting. One of the first things was, as you said, three-dimensional thinking was Dick Grove. He said, look, and it was a composition arranging program, and he said, there's so many great musicians here, I know, but please start writing without an instrument. I don't care how good you are. I don't care. An instrument will always limit you. The biggest joke is, oh, I play incredible piano, therefore I can write. He said that will be always limiting because you will always write what you just played. But orchestra is like, leave the guitar outside and start trusting your modular brain in that. That's what will give you freedom.
I know that we're all dealing with a lot of stuff these days, so I particularly wanted to acknowledge those that have taken the time to leave honest reviews of this podcast, like Elaine Grant, who called the show insightful, practical, eye-opening. As a veteran public radio producer and host, she says, and now an entrepreneur running a podcast consultancy, I thought I knew about the world of audio. Truth is, I knew just a small slice of this big and important world. I've learned so much from every episode. I need to re-listen and furiously take notes. I can't recommend audio branding highly enough. Thank you for taking the time to leave your comment, Elaine. It means so much to me. And now, back to the show. Yeah, that's really interesting advice. And yeah, it does seem like it would be less limiting to not have a specific instrument in mind or to know where a specific instrument might come in, but you're looking at many different instruments instead of just one.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then movies, I mean, movie and film, that's like a whole other genre of writing music. Like, what are the differences, you think, between writing for film and writing for just like us, like a song that would go on the radio, like, or be streamed, or right now, that's really what it is. What do you think the differences are?
I think the difference is I mean because I also lived in Nashville, Tennessee, and was on a songwriting deal with a big publishing house, and a song is about...
So you've seen both ends.
A song is about attracting attention. Here come the chorus, and you know, how hooky can it possibly be? And film is the opposite. Film is almost, do not call attention to yourself most of the time. Meaning, be there and support whatever's going on. And you know, that... especially when I worked on Star Trek Next Generation for 3 years, and it was very clear that it should sound as if one person wrote it. So we were like 10 composers, and each of us wrote like 2 or 3 minutes a week, and it was according to a very strict set of rules, meaning. Picard is on the bridge, planet explodes, and you can only write in that range, and the oboe only here because you need to stay out of his range, and it's almost like opera, and it's interesting how this translates to sonic branding. What I'm doing today is that the goal is for 193 episodes to be identifiable with your back to the television, getting a beer from the fridge. You need within 2 seconds understand, oh, Star Trek is on, or The Simpsons, or Star Wars, or, you know, that is the trick. And I think that to me was always so fascinating, where it sounds like out of one glue, out of one, you know, it had a complex sonic style guide, as we do today for Mercedes or you know, MasterCard, and it's very similar actually.
Yeah, that's interesting. So now you're working with you know, Mercedes and MasterCard, and so the consistency, I guess, of their sound has to be across the board, whatever they're implementing. How difficult is that to implement? Once you've got the audio brand, like what happens? Because I talk with a lot of people about audio brands, and I love hearing about all of the little nuances that go into creating it, and we will definitely talk about that. I look forward to talking more about that, but I'm curious about the implementation, because that always tends to be the thing that's the most difficult to happen after the audio brand is created. So how did MasterCard do this? So they're implementing now, right? Yeah. So how are they implementing your sound?
Great point. It is they implemented in 183 countries. Now
that's a lot.
That's not like US, and then we're, you know, and you need to get them on board. If there's not serious benefit to the organization globally, you will be not supported. Neither on agency side nor on brand side. It'll just, people will you can't force them. Let's put it this way. But when they see this brings me immediate advantage, then it becomes a lot easier. And you can't just drop it on them. You need to kind of take them by the hand and guide them through and show them how this can be implemented and how this can make their life so much easier. Give you an example. MasterCard has something called the Sonic Space, and it's basically a repository of all Sonic assets that they own, and content creators for MasterCard can access this all around the planet. And they have like a Netflix dial in, and then you can access this, and this is growing, and everything that's in there is owned outright by the brand and is a derivative of the Sonic DNA. And what makes this really cool for especially agencies is a lot of agencies are very skeptical when it comes to Sonic branding. Because they say, "Oh my God, he's going to put a Sonic logo on everything," and I said, I'm. This is not about above the line. This is not about your 7 p.m. TV spot. It's like, this is about everything else. So, but if you, and I will never dictate to you what you do or cannot do, but please, here's a login and check it out. And what's interesting, the agency usually comes back and says, "This is amazing. How did you? This sounds like better than our music productions. This is like so authentic. This has grit. This seems like finding the Beatles in the garage." And I said, that's
a good one.
I said, well, that's what every agency guy wants. They want to find the Beatles in the garage, or Coldplay, or U2, or whatever, and be able to say, I was the first one who heard this. But we said, why don't we do exactly that? Because we believe it's not authentic to have one guy writing 20 different styles in a music production. That's viscerally, we'll always feel it's not authentic. And so we went the other way and said, this is more headache to write with the Beatles when they're still in the garage, because they're not used to 20 changes, but it's much more authentic, and this is really interesting. This is what we do till today with hundreds of composers worldwide, where they basically contribute to these sonic spaces and write music inspired by the DNA. It's like James Bond. It's like Billie Eilish writing a Bond song, Adele writing a Bond song. It's based on the sonic DNA of Bond. And we do basically that, but going into 35 different consumer touch points.
That's huge, first off. But also, aren't they doing an album? They've done an album, haven't they, MasterCard? They've put like a music album out? How did that come about? What was the thought process behind deciding to do that? Because it's not the usual thing a brand would do, right?
Well, yeah. I always have to credit Roger Manar, the CMO of MasterCard, because his openness to be really disruptive and to really have something new. He was one of the first guys to completely understand that the Sonic logo-based Sonic branding is not going to fly into the future. That he needs something different to show up in all of these new touch points, that is flexible, that is has longevity, something that he owns outright, the IP. What we don't know, what's difficult to see is that most music that's used by brands is not owned. They own the T-shirt, but they don't own the body that wears the T-shirt. They might own 20 versions of that T-shirt, but they still don't own the body, the IP. And that is tricky when you go into different experiences like metaverse or different touch points. It's like when you don't own your stuff, it's difficult. And what Raja and MasterCard did was so enormous, because the reality is that there has been no evolution in sonic branding for 30 years. Intel came on the market in 94. Wonderful. And it worked like dynamite in a world where reaching the consumer with a TVC was enough. And to have a 3-second static logo, that's enough. That's okay. I'm done. Check. Fast forward 30 years, there still has been no evolution. Meaning in visual branding, you don't just have a business card. You have an entire experience, and in Sonic, you have then what? Stock music that's brand agnostic, non-exclusive. You have composed music, doesn't build Sonic brand equity. And then you have licensed music, standing next to the cool kid, hoping for a credibility transfer. All of this is not an evolution in terms of, well, how do I show up on 30 different touch points? And that music needs to be so flexible that I can go into 20 different genres, like James Bond does, into decades, because I guarantee fashion will change. That's a guarantee. But if you own the body, it doesn't matter. You just wear different fashion. That's it.
Are you looking for ways to improve your company's or podcast's impact? You'd be surprised how powerful the use of an intentional audio branding strategy can be. Want to know more? I have a free downloadable PDF that gives you my 5 tips for implementing an intentional audio strategy at voiceoversandvocals.com/audio-branding-strategy. That location does ask to put you on a mailing list, just to send you updates on when the new podcasts come out. But if you really don't want to give your email out, I understand. Just contact me directly. My email is all over my website, and I'll make sure you get that PDF without needing to sign up anywhere. If you do sign up, though, you also get access to a resources section called The Studio, where I have videos, white papers, and PDFs, discounts from my guests, and snippets of audio from my guests that no one else gets to hear. So maybe it's worth your while. Totally up to you. And of course, if you're looking for voiceovers, you can get in touch with me about that too. Now, back to the podcast.
That is really what's absolutely fascinating to me is that, Adele writing a Bond song stays completely authentic Adele. But what happens here is that she goes on eyes level with the brand James Bond, and she uses the harmony. She doesn't even use melodies, nothing, just the harmony. She uses one piece of the sonic asset toolbox and writes Skyfall. And within a second, with closed eyes, we understand that's a Bond song. But what's interesting, Adele doesn't bend. Adele stays Adele. And Billie Eilish stays Billie Eilish. And Duran Duran and Garbage and 25 different top 10 musicians, because that's what they all have in common. They're all top 10, okay? They're all megastars in their time. But that is the brilliance. And this is basically where MasterCard completely turned around and said, okay, I want to get onto eyes level with an artist. The old world is, we'll take a song, slap it on top of the brand, and pray for a credibility transfer. That's old world licensing, a $32 billion business. which is licensing music to brands. That's unsustainable. That's a sugar high. That's all these things that are, it's a creative muscle memory that we learned as brands, that we learned as agencies. And we still, if you're an intern today in New York at BBDO, what do you learn? Licensing. It's only good if there's a touring artist, and I say, I don't think so. And this is where MasterCard basically said, no, I want to be like James Bond. I want it to be an honor for an artist to write a MasterCard song. And people would we would look at this and say, no, it's just a brand. And I would say, what do you mean just a brand? You know in how many countries brands are more trusted than their governments? And you
huge. Just
say just a brand? I mean, please come again if you think that. And I always start the story with a brand where I said, you need to stop associating with sonic pop culture and start creating sonic pop culture. It's a huge difference. Associating is standing next to the cool kid. Creating is, hi, I'm MasterCard. Here's my sonic toolkit. Dear Travis Scott, can we get into a co-creation process on ICE level where you carry the brand, MasterCard, but also the brand of the artist, and have this in incredible good sense instead of we'll just take something and put it on top of the brand. That's the old world. That's that $32 billion business that to me is great. Don't get me wrong. People always say, oh, you hate licensing. I said, not at all. Not at all. If you have a Super Bowl spot and you want to support an authentic narrative, by all means, license Bob Dylan or the Beatles. Check. I would never, ever put a Sonic logo in that because it supports the narrative. On an automotive client with 32 consumer touch points and has 13 car fairs a year that he has to, and no. Somebody that posts 4 TikToks a day. No. Somebody that posts, we don't realize the sheer amount that a brand like that has to come up with in terms of audiovisual content.
Oh, yeah.
It's enormous.
There's a ton.
It's going up exponentially. Yeah. And it's like, now how are you going to show up there? This is, so many CMOs say, this is the best ever. I have all these opportunities to reach consumers. They consume content on different platforms. But how do I show up there? Because all I have, again, is a Sonic logo, licensed and stock and composed. But what am I going to do there? And then on top of that, if I don't own it in a metaverse? What then? Because that future, you cannot build on sand. You need to build on a solid rock to be able to make your brand sonically future-proof, going into decades and being totally independent of length or location where this happens. And this is, think about just the global YouTube channel of a major car manufacturer. We have 10 uploads a day with an average of at least 5 rights holders per upload. So you'll have 50 different rights holders for one day all over the planet. No cost control, no quality control, no plagiarism control because of sound-alike practices. And then do that times 365. And that's your reality. And that's only YouTube. That's not all the other platforms. And that's where we need a solution. And that cannot be, we'll have a sound logo. You see what I mean?
This has been part 1 of our interview. I hope you'll tune in next week for part 2. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time,